The scent of leather and expensive cologne clung to everything in the circular driveway, a luxurious perfume that masked the underlying danger. Late afternoon had descended upon the Lombardo estate with golden intensity, forcing Emmy to squint against the sunlight reflecting off the mansion's marble columns. She pulled her worn delivery jacket tighter around her shoulders, trying to appear smaller as she navigated the intimidating entrance where luxury cars lined the pristine pavement. Being a delivery driver in a world dominated by wealth and power meant learning how to move like a shadow, how to fade into backgrounds, how to make yourself forgettable. My brown hair, the one feature I couldn't easily conceal, was pulled back in a practical ponytail, secured with a rubber band that had seen better days. The silver compass keychain dangling from my delivery scanner had belonged to my mother before she died. She had given it to me the last time I saw her, telling me, "When you carry this, sweetheart, you'll always find your way home." The memory of her words had become my talisman in moments like these, when my heart hammered against my ribs and my hands grew clammy with unease. Delivery for Mr. Lombardo. The instruction had appeared on my scanner an hour ago, and the address had made my stomach drop. Everyone in the city knew the Lombardo name, even if they pretended not to. The gates had opened automatically when I'd pressed the call button, as if I were expected, as if there were cameras tracking my every movement. I pressed forward along the smooth stone pathway, clutching my scanner like a shield as men in expensive suits watched from the shadows of the columned entrance. He moves through life with the confidence of someone who has never questioned his right to power, I thought, watching a tall man with dark eyes and visible tattoos emerge from the mansion's entrance. His shoulders were broad beneath an impeccably tailored black suit, his jaw hard beneath a shadow of stubble that somehow looked deliberate rather than unkempt. At his side walked several men who moved with military precision, and behind them, trailing with reluctant, angry steps, was a boy of perhaps 7 or 8 years. The Mafia boss's son. Even from my position at the foot of the driveway, I could sense the child's distress. His small face was contorted in a scowl that mimicked his father's, but his eyes betrayed something wilder, a fury that seemed too large for such a small body. This was Adriano Lombardo, the subject of whispered rumors among delivery drivers and service workers. His mother had left 3 years ago, abandoning her family to escape the dangerous world she'd married into. Since then, the boy had become infamous for his hatred of women. No nanny lasted more than a week in his presence before being driven away by his violence and cruelty. "Sign here, please," I should have said, approaching with my scanner extended. Package deliveries were routine after all, but my attention remained fixed on the boy. He was pulling at his small black jacket, his distress growing more evident by the second. Then, as if sensing my gaze, he looked up. Our eyes met across the driveway, and in that instant, something inexplicable passed between us. Not warmth, not understanding, but a moment of pure recognition, two people who knew what it meant to be left behind. The boy's eyes widened, then narrowed to slits. He bared his small teeth at me in what could only be described as a snarl. I quickly lowered my gaze, heart racing. What had possessed me to make eye contact with a mafia boss's son? Delivery drivers knew better than to draw attention to themselves, especially from families like this. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, "Keep your head down, but never lose yourself, baby girl." "You have a delivery?" Sergio Lombardo was saying, his gaze sweeping over me with the assessing look of someone who calculated threats instinctively. His accent was subtle but present, adding weight to each word. "Leave it with my men." My fingers instinctively touched the small compass keychain attached to my scanner. Keeping promises was my only currency in a life that had stolen everything else from me. I had survived 10 foster homes and 3 years on my own by showing up, by being reliable, by being the person who didn't disappear. "I need a signature," I heard myself say, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "Company policy. It has to be from the person listed on the delivery." A ripple of tension moved through the suited men as heads turned, clearly unused to anyone contradicting their boss's instructions. Sergio Lombardo's gaze found me again, his expression unreadable but his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Step forward," he commanded, his voice softer but somehow more dangerous at this proximity. I moved through the watching men, conscious of every eye upon me. My legs felt unsteady, my steps careful on the pristine stone. Standing before Sergio Lombardo, I fought the urge to shrink away, focusing instead on the steady weight of my mother's compass swinging from my scanner. "Your name?" he asked, and up close I could see the weariness behind his intimidating exterior, the face of a man who slept lightly and trusted no one. "Emmy, sir. Emmy Waters." I managed to meet his eyes for the briefest moment before lowering my gaze respectfully. "I just need your signature, and I'll be out of your way." "A delivery driver who follows the rules," he mused, and I couldn't tell if his tone held amusement or annoyance. "You understand you're standing in a dangerous place, Miss Waters?" Before I could answer, a small but powerful force collided with my legs. Adriano had launched himself at me, his small fists pounding against my thighs as he screamed, "Go away. No more women. You'll leave too." They all leave. The driveway fell into tense silence, the collective breath of the household staff held in shock. I could feel the men moving closer, ready to pull the boy away, but something in me resisted the obvious response. Acting on instinct rather than training, I dropped to one knee, bringing myself to the child's level. I didn't attempt to restrain his flailing hands or quiet him with empty promises. Instead, I simply existed in his storm, letting him expend his fury while I remained steady, the way I wished someone had been for me when I was small and angry and abandoned. "I hate you," he spat, his small chest heaving with the effort of his rage. "I hate you like I hate all of them." "I know," I said quietly, surprising myself with the calm in my voice. "That's okay." His assault paused momentarily, confusion crossing his features. He'd clearly expected fear, apologies, or someone grabbing him roughly. My acceptance of his hatred seemed to bewilder him more than any defense could have. "You smell like coffee and gasoline," he said accusingly, as if this were somehow a personal failing. I nodded. "I work 3 delivery jobs. The smells kind of stick to you after 12-hour shifts." The boy's nostrils flared as he drew in my scent more deliberately, as if trying to catalog whether I was lying. Something in his rigid posture softened almost imperceptibly. I knew this moment was precarious. One wrong move could reignite his violence, or worse, draw his father's wrath for my presumption in addressing his son so directly without permission. "Adriano." Sergio Lombardo's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Step away from her." The boy hesitated, his eyes still locked with mine. In that suspended moment, I saw past his anger to the wounded child beneath, a boy whose mother had vanished, whose father was unreachable, whose world had been defined by abandonment and broken promises. I recognized that pain because it lived in me too. An old companion that had shaped the contours of my existence since my mother had died in a car accident when I was barely older than Adriano was now, leaving me to navigate the foster system alone. "It's okay to be angry," I whispered low enough that only he could hear, my hand instinctively reaching for the compass keychain. I unclipped it and pressed it into his small palm. "But you don't have to carry all that anger by yourself forever." The silver compass gleamed in the late afternoon sun as his fingers closed around it, his eyes going wide with something that looked almost like wonder. "This was my mom's," I said softly. "She gave it to me so I'd always find my way home. You can hold on to it for me." I met his eyes directly, making a promise I had no business making to a mafia boss's son. "I'll come back to check on you. I promise." Adriano stared at the compass, then at me, his expression shifting from rage to something vulnerable and desperate, the look of a child who wanted so badly to believe but had learned that belief only led to more pain. "You'll leave," he whispered, but there was a question in his accusation now. "Everyone leaves." "Not me," I said, and in that moment, I meant it with a certainty that terrified me. I keep my promises. Before we continue, please subscribe. My mom says I won't get to 1,000 subscribers, so please let's prove her wrong. Okay, let's get back to it. The knock came at 7 in the morning, sharp and authoritative, nothing like the hesitant tapping of my elderly neighbor Mrs. Smith or the impatient pounding of my landlord demanding rent. I'd been awake for an hour already, nursing instant coffee at my cramped kitchen table while sorting through delivery route assignments on my phone. 3 jobs meant 3 different apps, 3 different schedules, and exactly 0 margin for error if I wanted to make rent this month. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Through the peephole, I saw a man who didn't belong in my building's dingy hallway. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly income, and his stance had the rigid discipline of military training. His eyes swept the corridor with the practiced vigilance of someone paid to notice threats. My stomach dropped. I knew, with absolute certainty, why he was here. Miss Waters. His voice carried through the door, accented but clear. My name is Luca Moretti. I work for Sergio Lombardo. I need to speak with you. It's about Adriano. The boy's name made my hand move to the deadbolt before my brain could catch up. I opened the door just wide enough to see him properly, keeping the chain lock engaged. Is he hurt? The question escaped before I could stop it, before I could pretend I didn't care about a child I'd met once for 5 chaotic minutes. Luca's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Not physically. But he's locked himself in his room since yesterday afternoon. He won't eat, won't speak to anyone. He's destroying furniture, and Mr. Lombardo is, he paused, choosing his words carefully, concerned. Why come to me? I'm nobody. I'm just. You're the delivery driver who made him stop screaming. Luca's dark eyes held mine with uncomfortable intensity. You're the woman who gave him something precious and promised to return. He's been asking for you, Miss Waters. Demanding you, actually. Mr. Lombardo sent me to find you. The weight of those words settled over me like a physical thing. A mafia boss had sent his security chief to track me down because his son wanted the nobody delivery driver who'd shown him 5 minutes of kindness. I can't just, I have deliveries scheduled, I have 3 jobs, Mr. Lombardo will compensate you for your lost wages. Luca pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, thick with cash. This is for today. If you can help Adriano, there will be more. Much more. I stared at the envelope, at the money that represented more than I made in 2 weeks of grueling 12-hour shifts. My rational mind screamed at me to refuse, to slam the door, to run from anything involving the Lombardo family and their dangerous world. But I kept seeing Adriano's face, that moment when rage had cracked to reveal the abandoned child underneath. I kept feeling the weight of his small hand closing around my mother's compass. I kept hearing my own voice making a promise I'd had no right to make. Let me get my jacket, I said, already knowing this decision would change everything. Luca nodded once, professional but relieved. The car is waiting downstairs. The hallway leading to Adriano's room looked like a war zone. A shattered vase lay scattered across marble floors, water pooling around crushed roses. Picture frames hung crooked on silk-papered walls, and I could hear the rhythmic thud of something heavy being thrown against a door. Sergio stood outside the room like a sentinel, his jaw tight with frustration and something that looked dangerously close to desperation. When he saw me, his expression shifted, relief battling with pride, a man unused to needing anyone. He won't respond to me, Sergio said without preamble, his accent thickening with emotion. To anyone. But he keeps asking for the woman with the compass. The crashing sounds continued from behind the locked door, punctuated by a child's ragged breathing. I moved past Sergio and sank down against the wall beside the door, crossing my legs and settling in like I had all the time in the world. The expensive carpet was soft beneath me, so different from the threadbare floors of my apartment. Adriano? I called, not loudly, not demanding. It's Emmy. The delivery driver. I came back like I promised. The crashing stopped. Silence stretched so long I thought he wouldn't answer. You're lying. His voice came muffled through the heavy door, hoarse from screaming. You only came because he paid you. That's true, I said, because lying to children had never worked for me in the foster homes. Your dad did pay me to come. But I would have come anyway, eventually. I just would have had to save up bus fare first. Silence again. I could feel Sergio's gaze boring into me, but I kept my focus on the door. My mom left when I was 9, I said quietly, pulling my knees to my chest. Car accident. After that, I lived in 10 different houses over 8 years. Nobody wanted to keep me very long. I was too quiet, too angry, too expensive to feed. I learned to pack my things fast because I knew I'd always be leaving. Did you hate them? Adriano's voice was closer now, like he'd moved to sit against the door from his side. Sometimes. Mostly I just felt invisible. Like I was a problem they were solving, not a person they were keeping. I'm not invisible. His voice cracked. Everyone sees me. They just wish they didn't. That's lonelier, I think, I said. Being seen but not known. The lock clicked. The door opened a crack, and I could see Adriano's red-rimmed eyes peering out. My mother's compass was clutched so tightly in his hand that his knuckles had gone white. You came back, he whispered, and the disbelief in his voice broke something in my chest. I promised. He pushed the door open wider, revealing the destruction inside: overturned furniture, torn curtains, a lamp broken against the wall. He stood there in wrinkled clothes, small and devastated, and I opened my arms. Adriano collapsed into me, and for the first time in 3 years, Sergio's son cried. Not the angry tears of tantrums, but the broken sobbing of a child who'd been holding his grief like a weapon because he didn't know how else to carry it. I held him, rocking slightly, the way I wished someone had held me. When I finally looked up, Sergio was standing in the doorway, his expression raw with something between anguish and hope. Stay, he said, and it wasn't a request. Move into the estate. Be his companion, his tutor. Name your price, Miss Waters. Whatever you need, I'll provide it. I looked down at Adriano, still clinging to me, and felt the last of my resistance crumble. The guest cottage sat at the edge of the estate's manicured gardens, far enough from the main house to offer privacy but close enough that I could see Adriano's bedroom window from my front door. It was larger than my entire apartment, with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum and a bathroom with heated floors that I was genuinely afraid to use. Maria, the head housekeeper, had shown me around with the kind of professional courtesy that barely masked suspicion. She was in her 50s, her steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, and she moved through the estate like she owned it through sheer force of will. Breakfast is served at 7 in the main dining room, she'd said, her accent thick and her tone clipped. You are not to enter Mr. Lombardo's study or the East Wing without explicit permission. The household staff will provide anything you need, but we maintain discretion about family matters. Always. The warning was clear: I was being watched, evaluated, and one wrong move would see me back in my crumbling apartment. The other staff members were equally guarded. Giuseppe, the estate manager, barely acknowledged my presence. Luca offered professional nods but nothing more. Even the gardeners seemed to know I was temporary, someone who would inevitably fail like all the others who'd tried to reach Adriano. Only Adriano seemed certain I belonged. Our daily sessions started simply. We'd sit in the estate's library, surrounded by leather-bound books neither of us touched, and I'd ask him about his day. At first, he'd respond in monosyllables, testing whether I'd lose patience like the tutors before me. But I'd learned in foster care that silence was often safer than speech, so I waited. By the third day, he started asking questions. Why didn't your foster families keep you? Because I reminded them I wasn't really theirs, I'd answered honestly. And that scared them. My dad doesn't know what to do with me either. Maybe he's just scared too. Scared of losing you the way he lost your mom. Adriano had gone quiet then, turning my mother's compass over in his hands. He carried it everywhere now, a talisman against abandonment. I saw Sergio mostly at a distance, taking phone calls in Italian that sounded like threats, meeting with men who arrived in expensive cars and left looking either relieved or terrified. He moved through his world with absolute authority, a man who commanded empires with a glance. But every evening, he'd appear outside the library, watching through the doorway as Adriano and I worked on schoolwork or simply talked. His expression in those moments was stripped of its usual hardness, revealing something almost vulnerable. On my fifth night, I found him on the terrace, nursing whiskey and staring into darkness. He's doing better, I offered quietly, uncertain if my presence was welcome. Sergio didn't turn. Because of you. Not because of anything I've done. You brought me here. That's something. I drove his mother away. The words came out harsh, self-lacerating. Sophia begged me to leave this life. To take Adriano somewhere safe, somewhere normal. I refused. I told her this was our legacy, our power. So she left without him because she knew I'd never let her take my son. The guilt in his voice was a living thing, corrosive and consuming. You can't undo the past, I said carefully. But you can choose different for his future. Sergio finally looked at me, his dark eyes searching my face for judgment. Can I, Miss Waters? Or have I already destroyed any chance he has at happiness? I thought of Adriano's laugh that afternoon, genuine and surprised. He's still here. That means there's still hope. Adriano noticed the compass was missing during our morning session, his hands frantically patting his pockets before moving to the desk where he usually left it overnight. The panic that crossed his face was immediate and visceral, the kind that came from losing the only thing anchoring you to safety. It's okay, I said quickly, watching his breathing accelerate. We'll find it. Maybe it fell under your bed, or you left it in the bathroom. But even as I said it, unease prickled along my spine. Adriano was meticulous with the compass, treating it like the lifeline it had become. He didn't misplace it. We searched his room together, checking under furniture and between books, but found nothing. When Adriano's distress began spiraling toward a full breakdown, I convinced him to wait in the library while I searched more thoroughly. The fear in his eyes as I left nearly broke my resolve. His bedroom felt different without him in it, larger, colder, full of shadows that seemed to watch. I checked the obvious places first, then moved to less likely spots. That's when I noticed his closet door was slightly ajar, though I'd watched him close it that morning with his usual precision. Inside, pushed to the back corner beneath winter coats, I found a mahogany storage box I hadn't seen before. It wasn't locked. Inside lay Adriano's compass alongside a burner phone, the cheap kind you could buy at any convenience store with cash. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. This wasn't mine to investigate. This was exactly the kind of boundary crossing that would get me thrown out of the estate, or worse, given what I'd learned about the Lombardo family business. But Adriano's tear-stained face flashed through my mind, and my thumb pressed the power button before I could stop myself. The phone opened to a messaging app, no password required. Someone had been careless, or arrogant, or both. The messages loaded, and my stomach turned to ice. Shipment arrives Thursday. The Russos are moving faster than expected. The old guard is becoming a liability. Time to remove obstacles. The boy is the key. Control him, control everything. My breath caught. The boy. Adriano. I scrolled further, my heart hammering against my ribs. More messages discussed shipments, territory disputes, and repeatedly referenced eliminating the current leadership. This wasn't just business as usual, this was betrayal, planned and systematic. Someone inside Sergio's inner circle was working against him. Someone with access to his home, his son's bedroom, his most private spaces. I pulled out my own phone with trembling hands and photographed every message, every contact, every detail I could find. The clicking of my camera shutter sounded deafening in the quiet room, and I kept glancing toward the door, expecting to find someone watching. When I'd documented everything, I carefully returned the burner phone to its exact position in the box, my mind racing. I should tell Sergio immediately. But what if the traitor was someone he trusted completely? What if my accusation put Adriano in more danger? I grabbed the compass and closed the box, my decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. I'd tell Sergio. But carefully, privately, when I was certain we wouldn't be overheard. Because whoever had hidden that phone in Adriano's closet had wanted it found eventually, or had placed it there as insurance, knowing the boy's room was the last place Sergio would think to search. Either way, Adriano was already caught in the crossfire of something far more dangerous than his mother's absence. I found Sergio in his study that evening, alone for the first time since I'd arrived. The room smelled of leather and tobacco, walls lined with books that looked read rather than decorative. He was reviewing documents, his reading glasses making him look almost professorial until you noticed the gun resting casually on his desk. "Mr. Lombardo, I need to speak with you. Privately." He looked up, immediately reading the tension in my voice. "Close the door." I did, my hands still trembling slightly as I pulled out my phone. "I found something today. In Adriano's closet. I wasn't snooping, the compass went missing and I was searching for it, and I found." "What did you find, Miss Waters?" His voice had gone dangerously quiet. I showed him the photographs, watching his expression shift from confusion to fury to something much colder and more calculating. When he finished scrolling, he set my phone down with deliberate care, the kind of control that suggested violence barely leashed. "You went through my son's belongings without permission. You accessed private communications that have nothing to do with you." Each word was precise, sharp. "Do you understand the severity of what you've done?" "Yes." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "And I'd do it again. Those messages mention Adriano. Someone is using him, or planning to. I don't care about your business or your organization, but I care about that boy, and he's in danger." The silence stretched between us, heavy with threat and assessment. Then Sergio's shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly, the anger bleeding into exhaustion. "3 shipments intercepted in the last month," he said quietly. "2 of my most reliable contacts killed in what were staged to look like accidents." I knew there was a leak. I didn't know it had reached this deep. He stood and moved to the window, his back to me. "That phone, whoever placed it in Adriano's room has access to my home. To my private spaces. The list of people with that kind of access is..." He paused, and I could see his jaw tighten. "Very short. Your most trusted men," I finished. "Yes." The word came out bitter. "Marco, my consigliere, has been with me for 20 years. Giuseppe manages this entire estate. Luca heads my security. These are men I would trust with my life. With my son's life. One of them is betraying you." Sergio turned back to face me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for Adriano. The messages mentioned the Russo family. They'd been trying to move into my territory for years. If they have someone inside my organization, someone this close. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. What do I do? I asked. You stay close to Adriano. You trust no one except me. And you understand that by showing me this, by knowing what you now know, you've made yourself a target. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the quiet room. They will come for you, Miss Waters. Not today, perhaps not tomorrow. But eventually, they will realize you know too much. Then we find them first, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Before they hurt Adriano. Sergio studied my face for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his dark eyes. You should have run the moment you found that phone. Why didn't you? I thought of Adriano's smile, his laughter, the way he still clutched my mother's compass like a lifeline. Because I promised to stay. And I keep my promises. 3 weeks had transformed Adriano in ways that seemed almost miraculous. The rage that had defined him for 3 years had softened into something more complex, a child learning that vulnerability didn't always lead to abandonment, that trust could sometimes be rewarded rather than punished. He smiled now. Not often, and never without caution, but the smiles were genuine. He'd stopped destroying his room and started asking questions about everything: why birds migrated, how plants grew, what my favorite color was. The staff had stopped watching me with suspicion and started watching with something closer to cautious hope. Maria had even smiled at me yesterday, a brief crack in her stern facade. We were in the library on a Wednesday evening, surrounded by art supplies I'd convinced Sergio to buy. Adriano had discovered he liked drawing, though his subjects were always the same: houses with families inside, everyone together, no one leaving. The repetition broke my heart every time. I was reviewing his math homework when I heard his footsteps running down the corridor, faster than usual, excited rather than panicked. He burst through the library doors, his drawing clutched in both hands, his face lit with pride. Mom! Mom, look what I drew. The words stopped time. The entire household seemed to freeze, Maria in the hallway with fresh linens, Giuseppe passing by with his ever-present clipboard, Luca positioned at his usual post near the entrance. Even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Adriano seemed oblivious to the sudden silence, pushing his drawing toward me. See? It's us. You and me and Papa. I drew us at the garden, remember? When we saw the butterflies last week? My throat had closed completely. I stared at the drawing, 3 figures surrounded by bright flowers and impossibly blue butterflies, all of them smiling. Above them, in careful 8-year-old handwriting, he'd written, "My family." Adriano, I managed, my voice barely steady. You called me Mom. He said it simply, matter-of-factly, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You promised to come back, and you did. You keep your promises. That's what moms do. The logic was so pure, so devastatingly simple, that I couldn't speak. I just opened my arms, and he climbed into my lap the way he'd started doing during our reading sessions, trusting in a way that still surprised me. Is that okay? He asked against my shoulder, suddenly uncertain. Can I call you that? Yes, I whispered, holding him tighter. Yes, sweetheart. That's okay. When I looked up, Sergio was standing in the doorway. I hadn't heard him approach. His expression was raw, pain and hope and grief all tangled together in a way that made him look years older and somehow more human than I'd ever seen him. Our eyes met over Adriano's head, and I saw understanding pass between us. This wasn't just about Adriano healing. This was about Sergio realizing his son had found something with me that he couldn't provide, no matter how desperately he tried. Later that night, after Adriano was asleep, Sergio found me in the cottage. If you see anything suspicious, anyone acting unusual, you come directly to me, he said without preamble. Not Luca, not Giuseppe, not Marco. Only me. Do you understand? I nodded. You think the traitor will make a move soon? I think my son just publicly declared you're his mother. In our world, that makes you family. His jaw tightened. And that makes you a target they can't ignore. Marco Vitelli arrived for dinner on Friday evening with the easy confidence of someone who'd walked through the Lombardo estate's doors 1,000 times before. He was in his early 50s, silver threading through his dark hair in a way that made him look distinguished rather than old. His suit was impeccable, his smile warm, and when he embraced Sergio, the affection between them seemed genuine. So this is the miraculous Miss Waters, Marco said, taking my hand with old-world courtesy. Sergio tells me you've worked wonders with young Adriano. Emmy's been very good for him, Sergio said carefully, and I caught the subtle emphasis. A warning, perhaps, or a test. At dinner, Marco was charming and attentive, asking about my background with interest that felt genuine. He spoke to Adriano with paternal warmth, complimenting his improved table manners and asking about his drawings. Watching them together, I could see why Sergio trusted this man. Marco seemed to genuinely care. But something nagged at me. When Marco reached for his wine glass, I noticed his watch, expensive, clearly custom-made, with an ornate crest engraved on the face. The design was familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. I'd seen it before, in one of those true crime documentaries I'd watched during sleepless nights in my apartment. The Russo family crest. I forced myself to keep eating, to keep my expression neutral, even as my mind raced. It could be a coincidence. Maybe Marco had bought it at an estate sale, or it was a gift from someone who didn't know its significance. But the messages on that burner phone had mentioned the Russos repeatedly. After dinner, while Sergio took a phone call and Adriano showed Marco his latest drawings in the library, I slipped into the coat room. Marco's jacket hung on the third hook, expensive cashmere that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to be. My hands shook as I searched the pockets. In the inside breast pocket, I found another burner phone. The messages loaded, and my worst fears crystallized into horrifying certainty. Lombardo suspects nothing. The transition will be seamless. Eliminate him during the shipment exchange Thursday. Make it look like the Russos were responsible. I've had access to his home for 20 years. He trusts me completely. The fool. I photographed everything, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Marco had been planning this for months, maybe years. The ultimate betrayal, Sergio's oldest friend, the man he called brother, orchestrating his murder. Something small and silver fell from the jacket's inner pocket as I returned the phone. My mother's compass. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Marco had taken it from Adriano's room. He'd placed the first burner phone there. He'd been testing security, or sending a message, or gathering leverage. The compass was insurance, proof he could reach Adriano anytime he wanted. I grabbed the compass, my decision instant. Marco couldn't know I'd found his secret, not yet, not until I could tell Sergio safely. But when I turned to leave, Marco was standing in the doorway, his warm smile gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. Looking for something, Miss Waters? His voice was pleasant, conversational, and absolutely terrifying. Or perhaps you've already found it. My hand closed around the compass, and I realized with sickening clarity that I'd just made a fatal mistake. Marco stepped into the coat room and quietly closed the door behind him. Sergio isn't here, Marco said conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather. He left 10 minutes ago to handle an urgent matter at the warehouse. I made sure of it. Which means it's just you, me, and that curious nature of yours, Miss Waters. My mind raced through options, each one ending badly. Scream and risk him hurting Adriano. Run and leave the boy vulnerable. Fight a man twice my size with professional training. I don't know what you're talking about, I tried, but my shaking hands betrayed me. Please. I saw you pocket the compass. The same compass I took from Adriano's room 4 weeks ago. Marco's smile was almost paternal. You're very protective of the boy. It's actually quite touching. Sophia was the same way, before I had to deal with her. The words hit like a physical blow. What did you say? Oh, you didn't know? Marco's expression shifted to mock surprise. Sophia didn't abandon her son. She discovered I was working with the Russos, threatened to tell Sergio. I couldn't allow that. So I made her disappear and let everyone believe she'd run away. Sergio's guilt over driving her off made it beautifully believable. Horror and rage warred in my chest. Adriano had spent 3 years hating his mother, believing she'd chosen to leave him, when she died trying to protect him. You killed her. I eliminated a problem. There's a difference. Marco pulled a gun from his shoulder holster with practiced ease. And now, unfortunately, you're a problem too. You and the boy both. Control Adriano, control Sergio's empire, or at least, control it long enough to dismantle it for the Russos. He gestured toward the door with the gun. We're going to the study. You're going to bring Adriano. And then we're going to stage a tragic murder-suicide, the unstable delivery girl who couldn't handle the pressure of this life, who snapped and hurt the boy before turning the gun on herself. Sergio will be destroyed. Perfect timing for a leadership transition. My legs barely carried me to the library, where Adriano was still drawing, his face peaceful and content. When he saw me, his smile faltered. Emmy? What's wrong? We need to go to your father's study, sweetheart. I tried to keep my voice steady, but he knew me too well now. Marco followed us through the halls, the gun hidden but present. In the study, he locked the door and turned to face us. I really am sorry about this, he said, almost sincerely. You were good for the boy. But some things are bigger than kindness. He raised the gun, and time seemed to fragment. Adriano's scream. My body moving on instinct, pulling him behind me, shielding him with everything I had. The deafening crack of the gunshot. Pain exploded in my shoulder, but I stayed standing, stayed between Marco and Adriano. Then the door exploded inward, with splintering as Sergio crashed through with Luca behind him. I would learn later that Luca had grown suspicious of Marco's convenient emergency, had called Sergio back, had heard the gunshot. But in that moment, I only saw Sergio's face, transformed by absolute fury into something terrifying and primal. He moved like violence incarnate, disarming Marco with brutal efficiency before the older man could fire again. The fight was savage and brief. When it ended, Marco lay motionless on the Persian rug, and Sergio was standing over him, breathing hard, blood on his hands. Emmy. Adriano's voice pulled me back. I was on my knees, my shoulder screaming, but alive. We were both alive. Sergio turned to us, his expression breaking. Madonna Santa, Emmy. I kept my promise, I whispered, before everything went dark. I woke to the sound of Adriano crying. Not the angry, destructive sobs of before, but the quiet, broken weeping of a child who'd almost lost someone he loved. The private doctor Sergio had summoned was finishing bandaging my shoulder, and through the haze of pain medication, I could see Sergio holding his son, his own eyes suspiciously bright. She's okay, figlio mio, Sergio murmured. See? She's awake. She's okay. Adriano pulled away from his father and crawled carefully onto the bed beside me, avoiding my injured shoulder with a precision that broke my heart. He was still clutching my mother's compass, now returned to its rightful keeper. You stood in front of me, he whispered, his voice thick with tears. Marco had a gun, and you stood in front of me. Of course I did. My voice was rough, but steady. That's what moms do, remember? They keep their promises. They stay. Adriano buried his face against my good shoulder, his small body shaking. Emmy protected me like a real mom would, he said to his father, the words muffled but clear. She stayed. Even when it was dangerous. She stayed. Sergio's jaw tightened, and I saw him struggle with emotions he probably hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed, and for a moment, we were just three people who'd survived something terrible together. The doctor says you'll need several weeks to heal properly, Sergio said quietly. I've increased security, and Luca is personally vetting everyone on staff. You'll be safe here. Here, I repeated, understanding the weight behind that word. Stay. Sergio's voice was raw with something that went beyond gratitude. Not as an employee. Not as Adriano's tutor or companion. Stay as family. As his mother. As, he paused, struggling. As someone who belongs here. With us. I looked down at Adriano, still holding the compass like a talisman, and then at Sergio, this dangerous man who'd killed to protect us both. I thought about my cramped apartment, my 3 delivery jobs, my lifetime of temporary homes and temporary people. I thought about how I'd learned to pack quickly because I always knew I'd be leaving. I need to stop running, I said softly. I need to choose to stay somewhere, with someone, even when it's hard. Choose us, Sergio said simply. Choose to be his mother. Choose to be, he stopped, but his eyes said what his words couldn't yet. I choose you, I whispered, and Adriano's arms tightened around me. Both of you. All of this. I choose to stay. 2 weeks later, we stood together at Sophia's grave. Sergio had finally had a proper headstone placed, replacing the anonymous marker he'd installed when he'd believed she'd abandoned them. Your mama didn't leave you, Sergio told Adriano gently, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. She loved you so much that she tried to save us all. She was brave, like Emmy. And she would be so proud of the boy you're becoming. Adriano placed flowers on the grave, then looked up at me. Can someone have 2 moms? One who's in heaven and one who's here? Yes, sweetheart. I knelt beside him, ignoring the pull in my healing shoulder. You can love them both. He nodded solemnly, then took my hand and his father's, linking us together. We stood there as the sun set over the estate, a family built on ashes and blood and fierce, chosen love, 3 broken people who'd found in each other something worth healing for. I'd finally found my way home. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe so you don't miss the next Mafia love story. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what you thought of this narrator. Your feedback really helps me make these even better for you. Thank you for letting my stories keep you company.